So, okay, before we start talking about the rebuilding itself of Ukraine, let's talk about the peace we'd like. Because the peace is a very general notion. And I think that, for example, Macron has something else in his mind when he talks about peace than Scholz. And Scholz has something different in mind than Duda. And Duda has something a bit different in mind than probably Mr. Zelensky. What kind of peace is necessary for Ukraine to effectively start rebuilding? Because it's not so obvious to everyone. And this is the general question, but let's start with Mr. Radchenko.
Thank you. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say when and how. And of course, it's very important what the gentlemen are saying, but I really believe that if we are talking about peace, so we have to talk about the full crash of Russia. And if we will start to talk about the ceasefire, I don't think that any Ukrainian will support this idea, because in this case we know this is just a break before the new killing, before the new aggression, and so on and so on. And it was so clear for us in 2014 when Russians came to Donbass and Crimea. And this is exactly, it was a start. So we have to identify what we are talking about. And first of all, the goal of the global civilization have to finally to crash Russia. And I know that somebody is afraid that what will happen if Russia will separate to small country or small. First of all, Russia is not a big country. It's a quite big, but not big, because the lot of mostly this territory of forest. And if we are talking about human beings, this is not so big country, in fact. And if we are talking globally, the two countries will reach very soon 3 billion people, and Russia is, nobody knows, and 140 is a quite optimistic number. We don't know exactly.
Yeah, losing people quite fast recently.
Yeah, and somebody are saying that this is not more than 100 million people. But let's go and let's go further than the topic.
Gennady, maybe let's stop on that. Because what I would like to know is what are the opinions of the other on that, and let's go fastly through this topic, all right? Maybe Mr. Siemaszko from Polish Ministry of Development.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. As a diplomat, I'm going to give it a diplomatic answer, and I'm going to say that's entirely up to Ukrainians themselves to decide. I don't want to be an armchair warrior encouraging fight that might not be in the best interest. Nor I want to be a peace snake encouraging peace that will be humiliating for Ukrainians themselves. You know, there are arguments that tragic as 2014 has been with Crimea and incursions in Donbass and Lugansk. The sort of status quo gave Ukraine time to reform the military and you know, embed a new fighting spirit to the nation, and we've seen results in heroic defense of Kyiv and the rest. So I think it's entirely up to Kyiv to decide what are the measures for peace. I support a just peace. I think that in the long term, best interest of Ukraine, that would mean a peace that would cripple Russian offensive capabilities, because otherwise we might see another attempted offensive. But again, it's entirely up to Ukraine, and we can only support this decision and the consequences it will entail.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manners. The same question: what kind of peace do we want?
I think to be at peace in the world is to be somewhat independent And Russia, the last time I looked, had an economy about 20% larger than Australia. Australia doesn't pretend to be a world power, but that one must wonder how Russia gets away with its world power image. And I think that Europe has fallen into the trap, as you all know, of becoming totally dependent on Russia for the provision of energy. But we in Australia have fallen into the same trap. As I left, I looked around our office and our home to see if there was anything not made in China. And there was one thing I found, and it was a Colgate toothpaste pump made in Poland. How about that? So I think the trap is for us to be at peace, is to be independent, and that's the way to gain respect from people. So these people, they can't push you around. Russia pushed Ukraine around and pushing Europe around, and it's got them intimidated because of this monopoly that they have on the energy supply. So let's be independent and maintain our own strength and dignity.
So the kind of peace that ensures independence to Ukraine is the kind of peace we want. Okay, those three voices are talking about, you're talking about the optimal outcome. You are the historian. So, so you can probably draw a picture more thorough about what can we really expect. Russia is a dysfunctional, failed state in a way, but it's been there since centuries. So how plausible is a scenario in which it really not only loses the war with Ukraine, but also, as some wishes, it actually dismantles into smaller maybe entities? Or how plausible is the scenario in which it really democratizes itself?
Okay, good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to say that the peace President Macron is speaking is probably the effect of those lengthy meetings with Vladimir Putin. And of course, we can look back in history and we can see that Vladimir Putin have learned the lessons from World War II and from the Cold War, when Marxism and socialism and communism is promoting this humanitarian message about peace. But it's a trap, of course. It's a trap. It's, I don't know, maybe thinking about war, it is always best to see the other as the aggressor. This is a way to give legitimacy to war. So I think this is the message that lies behind this so-called call for peace. Also in Romania, I can tell you that Russian-funded politicians, usually from the far right wing, they are talking, of course, about peace. Let's make peace. Or Ukraine should make peace, you know? So it's very sneaky if you want to. And of course, I will go to the second question. You've said, I think that, of course, historians deal with the past, but I will try to make some projections because here are a lot of economists and economists are dealing with projections. So I will try to estimate, and I think that Russia will probably lose the war because it is a matter of resources, and the Western world who is supporting Ukraine has obviously more resources than Russia. And after Putin will lose the war, because now Putin is all in, it's all in with this war. And I think that it is very likely to dismantle. At least it will lose the power, and I don't know what will happen.
This is what the ultra-Russian patriots are saying. So those people who like Russia to win, they say that if we lose, there will be a huge civil war. So I recently learned that even Gazprom has formed its own private army that could possibly take part in such a war. So Well, let me ask you one additional questions. One of the main concerns, actually, Gennady talked about that, in the case that this scenario will materialize, that the Russia just falls into this civil war, is that those nuclear power that Russia has will be taken over by some Ramzan Kadyrov style kind of people, right? That could be quite dangerous. That is one of the main concerns.
Yes, of course, but if we look to Russia, as we've seen in history, when coup d'etat took place, usually the capital matters the most, or the important cities. And if you look to Moscow or to St. Petersburg, we can see that the public opinion is not supporting the policies of the Tsar Putin. You know, and maybe this will matter. Maybe Russia has the chance of, I don't know, a democratic government. And of course, the other scenario is the black scenario, as you mentioned it, is the case in which some local warlords like Kadyrov could take over the power only for a short time, but they have that red button. And maybe if that red button will be pushed, I don't know what will happen.
Kadyrov is a bad example because he probably don't know how to do it, but okay. Let's talk about rebuilding then, because we said quite a lot about the peace. So now let's imagine that we have this kind of peace we want, and the rebuilding starts. What we're talking about in all those conferences, it's like what Poland should do, what the EU should do, what the US should do, and so on. We're talking about institutions, we're talking about governments. But well, to be honest, in the reality, most of the times when there is a successful reconstruction, it's the private actors who do the things. Like take Germany as an example. After the Second World War, Germany was pretty much destroyed. You know, a lot of bombings on Dresden, Cologne, and so on. It was very much destroyed. We don't know about, or we don't talk about that in Poland. They had a lot to rebuild. What they did is they implemented free market policies, so-called order liberalismus, right? So that's what they did. Not Marshall Plan is overestimated, the private sector. So in this case, can we count that the private sector will really do the job? Maybe let's start with Mr. Siemaszko from Polish Ministry of Development.
Oh, it's kind of easy to play the villain here, being the civil servant.
I didn't mean.
No, I'm joking. But I think, to be honest, you portrayed a false dilemma. I don't think anyone expects the state to rebuild Ukraine without involvement of private capital, private know-how, and private sector in general. But it's, I think, equally impossible to imagine any reconstruction of Ukraine without the involvement of international institutions and governments. And the post-World War II reconstruction is actually a good example. Now, we might argue, to what degree the Marshall Plan was instrumental in ensuring stability, also political stability, and economic prosperity in Europe, but that was, even disregarding that, the whole reconstruction was accompanied by a massive institutional international setup of IMF, Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank, the whole setup that helped stabilize currency, that helped democratic governments survive through 45, 48, difficult period for everyone, including not only in Germany, but also in France and Italy, all those countries with considerable communist influence. So winning war is one thing, and that's very, very hard, but winning peace and ensuring that we don't face sort of a scenario in which the rapid deterioration of economic situation in Ukraine undermines the legitimacy of democratic government is a must, is something that we have to do together. The current needs of Ukraine are estimated for around 383 billion euro, and that is unfortunately growing day by day. You cannot raise that private capital. You cannot also raise that public capital without taxing or indebting the government. We want to avoid both scenarios. So cooperation is necessary. And just to give an example of what we, for instance, did last year, governments cannot do everything, but we can help where we identify market failures. We've seen with risks of operations in Ukraine rising, we've seen the cost of insurance and premiums go up, effectively preventing any type of trade for short time being. We had to make sure that export credits are insured by our state agency to alleviate this risk, to help private sector engage. And we've seen wonderful results in 6% growth of Ukrainian exports to Poland, 53% growth of Polish exports to Ukraine. That is done by private sector, but we are there to enable this activity, not to replace it. So, let's go in this Christian democratic manner, hand in hand, solidarity, private and public sector together, rather than confrontational.
Thank you. Ron, your turn.
I think when you look at market failure, I think equal time must be given to government failure. And from various discussions we've had with Ukrainian officials and in Estonia and in Lithuania, when the Soviet Union fell apart and there was a demand to bring in property rights, it was done in too much of a hurry and not enough thought was given to it. And if you were in one of those Soviet-built apartment blocks, you owned your apartment. So that was your property rights, a little cubic space in mid-air. And the passage of years, when those buildings are falling apart now, there's a reluctance to demolish them and start again, because if you demolish them, those people lose their property rights. At the time, there was no property rights given in the underlying land. And that's where property rights belong, in the underlying land. So you have ownership, proper ownership, not a cubic space in mid-air. So this is a wonderful opportunity, or will be a wonderful opportunity, at the cessation of the war to make sure this time all those very important reforms are done correctly with a lot of detail. And that's why I'm so happy that all the thinking is starting now, so that we'll be ready to introduce proper property rights.
Thank you so much. Now let me turn to Mr. Gennady. You've been advising a lot of companies, working for a lot of companies, and you probably have the feel of how the markets perceives the reconstruction. So what Mr. Siemaszko said, that there should be state to ensure the stability of the capital flows, to guarantee that the money won't be wasted due to political risk, for example. So do you think that that's the right approach? The state acts as a guarantor or as a creditor, and the private business does the job. Is there this willingness, or is there just a talk?
Complicated question, but I will refer to your previous question and to say yes. And if we are talking about private business and private initiative in Ukraine, I would stress that you and we, all of us, basically we can't say we know Ukraine. But what we know, this is a big exporter of metal ore, #1 exporter of sunflower oil, and #3 grain. And basically grain is a big issue now. In fact, we don't know that the Ukraine is producing a lot of stuff for automobile industry for Europe. Ukraine, I know the one producer of refrigerators for supermarkets, and they have 16% of global market. And this is already not raw materials, and this is the products with quite complicated product. And for example, we are good in the service. The new post, which is this mailing, which we already mentioned today, this company started just 20 years ago from one small car and two people. And actually, this is not number 20 taxpayer in Ukraine. And basically, the business is still working in this hard time of the war. And this grain, let's say, so-called grain crisis, this is a good show. We are seeing that, and this is not about the grain. Of course, this is about politics, but we recognize finally that Ukraine is producing apple juice, using new technologies, and a lot of another products, pet food, which is quite popular. This is the brand new factories, and actually Ukraine is still this country with a lot of consumer from 30 to 40 million people. Private business is still operating. Even we are not happy with the oligarchs' business in the energy, but we can see this winter that this business is working, and basically they are quite stable, and they save the country with the energy. So this is quite developed country, and if we are talking about the free market, I really afraid that Europe have to be prepared to the open competition. I would think that maybe now the farmers are not happy. Maybe tomorrow PGE will be not happy because of the cheap energy coming from the Ukrainian nuclear power station, and so on. So, in fact, I really think that the private business will help a lot. We have institutional problems, and this institutional problem is about the effectivity of the government, of the tax inspection, and I have my own recipe. We have just to cut 85% of the let's say governmental officer in tax inspection, and we can survive. But you know, we have to study what is Ukraine is, and from my question is about the rebuilding of Ukraine. How to rebuild? What we have to rebuild? Just to rebuild what was destroyed, or to build a new technologies, new roads, new railway, new infrastructure? We have this. We have, unfortunately, thanks to this dramatic war, we have a big chance to make a big jump and to be the country which is really one of the best in Europe. But the question is the peace, of course, and the institutional reforms.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Christian again and ask him about the past. We've seen a lot of cases in which a country was about to be rebuilt after war, many failures, or at least not full successes. Let's mention some countries of former Yugoslavia, right? So the eternal candidates to European Union that will probably never join. So what do you think is the necessary condition for an effective reconstruction besides peace?
I can see three problems: politicians, people, and philosophy. First problem, politicians. Usually after the war, the elections tend to be won by right-wing politician, conservatory politician, if you like, populist politician, or by leftists. But usually the right wing is winning after a war. Second of all is the people, because the people will feel entitled to gain, to receive from the state. They will go to their mayor or to their president, and they will say, okay, our kids died on the battlefield, we are entitled to receive this and that or anything else. So this is another problem. When I was referring to philosophy, I was referring to protectionism, because also in the other panel was our colleagues were talking about I don't know, people leaving the country for better jobs in the EU, for instance. So it's on the other side is this national protectionism, as the German Friedrich List in the 19th century said. You know, Ukraine will come and say, okay, we are not prepared to compete with the Western world. We are not prepared to compete with Germany, with, I don't know, with United States or France. So let's make some protectionist measures, and after that we'll deal with it.
Yeah, the protectionism can be the problem because it's very popular, and you know, it has a big appeal to the common man. It's an emotional rather than theoretical framework.
Yes, it's very intuitive. I don't know, most people will say, of course, we should protect our jobs, we should protect our grains, we should protect our industry. Don't let the foreigners come and use our force work in order to make money for the West. You know, this kind of speech is pretty usual in the Eastern and Central Europe world.
So let me ask, and now I have to be provocative. Let me ask Mr. Szymaszko from the Ministry of Development. You know, on one hand, we have learned that Poland has benefited from eliminating trade barriers. When we joined the European Union, no wonder we had a big advantage thanks to that. And we are aware of that, politicians are aware of that. Then we, due to some political reasons, purely political reasons, engaged in the quarrel over the grain. How do you think, what do you think will be the attitude of European political class towards Ukraine as a competitor? Gennady said, you need to be open for free competition, but what will be more important for European politicians? Winning elections or building peaceful Europe? I'm not talking only about Polish politicians, but you know, you belong to this not political class, but to the ruling class in a way. You get the feel, you studied abroad, I can feel it by the accent. So please, give your impression here.
You're really trying to get me fired, but no, but seriously, I think the Central European story of the last 3 decades is one of hard-won success, and the economic integration with the rest of Europe is part of this success. But it's not an easy story. It's not that on day one, you know, we've elected a solidarity government or negotiated a solidarity government, the Berlin Wall fall, and the market suddenly opened. No, it was a negotiated transition, asymmetrical one. We needed a capital. You know, entrepreneurs in the West looked for new markets. We faced massive unemployment and massive inflationary pressures. So the whole picture culminated in EU enlargement negotiations. And while Poland has benefited handsomely from our, you know, presence on the single market, you know, until 2016, 80% of our trade, of our exports went to the single market. We managed to reduce its dependency by removing UK from the EU. But it was done gradually. We've negotiated, or, you know, more precisely, Western governments negotiated transition periods. They negotiated differing approaches to different sectors, such as agriculture, which is extremely politically sensitive and amounts to, at least some degree, to food security in a given country. So I think Ukraine will enter the EU. Ukraine will be a success story for EU membership, but we will have to negotiate on both sides an equitable membership, and that not only includes opening up of EU markets for Ukrainian goods, which I still think was the right choice to make a year ago. The autonomous trade measures given to EU to Ukraine were the right call, but that also includes adoption of common standards on food and sanitary production, on the green transition, on the emissions trading scheme, a lot of, quote-unquote burdens that will level the playing field. And I think that Europe can only benefit from Ukrainian energy, from talents, from resilience, and that we will be stronger if we integrate better. But it's a gradual process that will require a lot of domestic reforms in Ukraine and some painful reforms in Poland and other EU member states too. Let's be honest about that.
Thank you so much. Of course.
Basically, we are talking about the business, about markets, about governments. We don't talk about consumers. And this competition is about consumers' benefits. Actually, the cheap grain or cheap food in the situation when we have the globally deficit of food is in favor of consumer. So we have to build also altogether the fair competition, fair market. When Ukraine signed the association agreement with EU, so we cut all taxes, customs taxes, customs duties. Thank you. Customs duties for all European products, and it was a concern of our business that goods with better quality, with cheaper, with Chinese components will come to Ukraine, but it pushed them to build the new factories, to invest in the business, to produce the better products. And basically, we have almost 80–85% of local made food in Ukraine, also by a multinational company. And it pushed business to work in favor of consumer. And business is not about producers. It's not about raw materials. This is about consumers. No business without consumers. And we have to think about it, about all consumers, and to the interest of consumers to buy the good products, safe products on the real fair price.
Thank you. Well, I would say that's totally true, and the consumer is a forgotten piece, lacking piece usually in such a discussion. Yet on both sides, talking about the grain quarrel, on both sides consumers were absent from the discussion. Even Ukrainians were fighting for their grain producers, not their consumers, right? Okay, but that's a totally different topic. Christian, we know that Ukraine took a free market approach in reforming its country. Ron is in touch with Marian Zaslavsky. He is working on the tax reform in Ukraine. They'd like to implement low taxes, flat low taxes in every aspect. So corporate taxes, income taxes, and VAT at the same level. That's the plan. Low regulatory framework, and so on. And yet we're talking about Ukraine joining the EU. So the EU is constantly raising the bar for the producers, for the entrepreneurs. So isn't it like, let's say China says, come to us, but first you need to learn Chinese. So Europe says to Ukraine, come to us, but first you need to learn our complicated regulatory things that you are maybe not yet ready for. But that's the requirement, that's the condition. So the question is whether, do you think that maybe European Union would make it practically impossible for Ukraine to join the single market? Not like openly from the formal standpoint, but in this way, raising the regulatory framework for Ukraine too high.
Yes. I want, of course, you're right, but I want to give an optimist answer. For instance, I don't know if you people know, but Romania is the first or the second country in the world with the fastest broadband internet connection. And do you know why this happened? Because usually Romania in the European Union is last at any chapter. Or, okay, maybe not last, but in the last places.
Still have a better soccer team than us.
It is because we've started very late to implement the internet in Romania, and starting very late, we've implemented the last innovations in broadband internet connection. So this is the reason why Romania has a so powerful internet. And maybe this is, we can make an analogy and go to Ukraine, and maybe this war, as bad as it is, maybe it is, I don't know, the chance for a new start on a ground zero level. But European Union will come with their regulatory, and maybe they will ruin the job, this kind of opportunity.
Ron, if Ukraine was faced with this choice, either free market on its own terms or European framework, regulatory framework with all these ideas, ESG things and so on and so on, what should it choose?
Don't get me started on ESG, DEI and all those sidetracking. They consume so much of your time, they're a complete waste of time. And who's behind it? I think you've got to study the economic subject of public choice theory to understand where all these diversions came from and whose benefits. It's always, public choice theory explains how those who receive the concentrated benefits work the hardest to introduce those sidetracking things. Climate change is another one. They're all connected with a fear of stuff. Now, a lot of the ESG, DEI stuff is what you do anyway in the business, just as part of being a decent individual running a company. But to do it to the extent of demoting the aspect of profitability and of demoting the priority that you have in representing your shareholders is a disaster. And I think it will continue until we have some successful class action suites from disenchanted shareholders who are absolutely come to the end of their patience with boards of directors who've got sidetracked like that. And I think that will create a jolt, and we'll see an end to that DEI and ESG thing. And it's starting to tail off, just as it's building up a head of steam in Australia, it's decreasing in America. So it's a fad. We've had it's like the Y2K fad we had 23 years ago. These things come and go, but profitability hopefully will return, because that's the way of representing your shareholders. And just, we talked about tax. I've got this terrible, I'm going to Estonia tomorrow. The terrible news I've heard is they're increasing their tax rate by 10%. Wow, that's been the pioneer of flat rate tax. 20% flat rate tax has been so successful in Estonia on promoting their startup. The whole concept of people going to Estonia to achieve these ends, to increase tax, is falling into the old trap. The government thinks that by increasing tax, they will increase revenue. Wrong. completely wrong. By reducing tax, the government increases revenue. And it's been proven again and again, and I think Estonia might have to find out the hard way.
Thank you. And now ask question, similar question to Mr. Shimashko, but maybe related to the bilateral relations between Poland and Ukraine. Before Ukraine joins the European Union, it probably it will take time, but we can do something on our own. We can have some kind of policies, some kind of relations with Ukraine that will allow our countries to cooperate closer. So what are the plans? What can the Polish government do here?
Well, there's a lot we can do bilaterally. There's a lot we can do regionally, and there's already a lot of things being done. Where to start? Well, first of all, we try to reduce the current existing bottlenecks, and the bottleneck is the Polish-Ukrainian border. We're trying to invest a lot on Polish infrastructure side, and we have borrowed Ukrainian government money through developmental aid to increase the pace, the security, transparency of the border crossings, and you know, in order to ensure that trade and human capital flows relatively uninterrupted. We can try to increase connectivity between two countries, investing in infrastructure, helping Ukraine move from the wide rail to European rail standards, improving the trade lanes. What we can do, and what is being done, is so-called technical assistance, which the term is misleading because it's very far from technical, but actually it includes a lot of legal assistance when it comes to, again, anti-corruption, transparency measures, trade measures, legal standards, helping Ukraine to advance through DCFTA and association agreements with the EU, thus getting into the steps of other Central European success stories. Finally, what we do is just to let entrepreneurs and civil society actually talk to each other. We try to facilitate that, but you know, we're here where you know, ZPP operates, and they've been terribly active in Ukraine. We've seen a lot of chambers working together, so a lot have been done below the government level, either through local governments or just through civil society and entrepreneurial organizations. Now, sometimes that requires some extra funding from the government, and we can get in a whole debate about taxpayers' money and so on, but the ability to support these good bottom-up initiatives is also crucial, especially in these testing times. And just one last sentence, I think the dilemma between free market and EU is a false dilemma, and we can get into that after the meeting, but it's a long discussion
By
there.
the pint of beer, right? Okay. I don't mind. Gennady, to you, my last question, and then the voices from the audience is welcome. As I said before, the most interesting question the author of the most interesting question will receive a book by Mr. John Chisholm about entrepreneurship. So I recommend you thinking of some nice dilemmas. Okay, Gennady. No. Okay, yes, so the last question is going to you from me. Last time, recently, I've been moderating a panel at the conference by ZPP. And I asked about regulatory framework in terms of fiscal tax policies. I asked about cohesion, whether there is some kind of compliance between those two systems, Ukrainian and Polish, also registering businesses and so on. And I was assured by people related to the Polish government, that it's all okay, it's all settled, it works smoothly. So I'm wondering if on this level, the regulatory framework is really allowing entrepreneurs from Ukraine and from Poland to cooperate. these days? To relocate smoothly between countries, to joint businesses, and so on and so on.
You know, I really think, from my knowledge, that this is a still different tax systems, and the Polish tax system is not a tax paradise, as you know, but the difference is about execution. The Polish institutions, Polish tax offices, they are more friendly to the business. And actually, I believe that the problem is not about the level of the tax. Because from my experience, my business experience, I used to work for the biggest multinational corporate, and it was never questioned about the level of taxes, because they operating globally in the different countries, they faced a lot of issues. But the issue is about equal practice for all entrepreneurs. So we have a quite big let's say, not so good managed tax office, which is operating basically against business. And we officially, the Business Association officially are saying that the tax inspection, let's call it in this way, is the biggest enemy of the business. And we have to repair this, as Ukraine have to repair this. If we are talking about the level of the taxes, this is not so big issue. And it improved all the time. The problem of Ukraine, as I already mentioned, I really believe that this is execution and competence of the government.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any questions? Okay, Yulia, let me handle your mic. Maybe this one.
Thanks a lot for the discussion. It was really interesting. I would like to leave a comment and have a question. I'm myself representing the student organization at the Warsaw School of Economics, where we prepare our own vision and plan of the recovery of Ukraine. I myself am from Kiev, and I was raised in Donbass. So what kind of hurt me, Sebastian, is that when you compared, let's say, should Ukraine create its own freedom market, so the free market, or go to the bad European regulatory, let's say, structure? In Ukraine, the European Union is viewed quite beyond the regulation structure. Because in the globalized world, you cannot create your own free market and be like, hey, look, we are between the EU and we are between Russia and we are free, come to us. We cannot afford being in Singapore because we have a dictatorship machine just on the right side of the map. So if we don't follow the European regulator framework, we have to end up in the hands of the dictator, where stealing, raping, killing is a norm. And to be a part of this regulatory framework where the human life is basically in the middle, more than 100 people have lost their lives in 2013, 2014. Then over 13,000 people lost their lives in the Donbass. And since the 24th February, I cannot even tell this number. We don't know the number of the people that lost it. So in case of free markets and the conference, it is like, it's accurate, but still we are fighting to have the human life in the middle. And that's what I really appreciate when it's kept. So regarding the question, when we began our project ourselves, we were like, okay, let's write something for the time where the war ends. So the next morning we wake up and we implement the plans. It's been a year. We shared the plan with the Ukrainian academic society, with the Ukrainian businesses, some people in the government. And we were viewed like people from the West. You know, like, you guys see that everything can begin only the next morning after the war. However, what can happen if we begin recovery now? And not pouring the billions just right away to do everything, but step by step. A village has been occupied, let's help the people to rebuild their houses. So, I don't know, a farmer who has his small farm will have now human life, decent conditions, and work, yeah, and provide the others with the food. Let's not steal the IT projects from the Ukrainian IT specialists, then they will earn the money, and they will donate for the Ukrainian army, they will pay to Ukraine the taxes, and the government will be able to invest. So what do you think about the recovery process? Can it really begin now if we're not thinking only about the millions, but basically step by step? Thank you.
So I understand there's a general question to all the panelists, so you're welcome to answer, whoever wants.
This is not a question.
We're all fighting to answer this question. If Ukraine can exhibit the same spirit and courage and bravery and be bold with your reforms, be bold and be the best, this is your chance, and other countries will follow if you be brave with your reforms. I think that's all I can say to encourage you. You will only get one chance, and this is it.
Nadia?
My answer is there is no another way. We start now. But first of all, thank you. Your English is fantastic and very difficult to find what is the question. But for your information, please believe me that all these European regulations are quite simple, in fact. And this is a practice of Ukrainian business on one hand. On the other hand, this is open market doesn't mean that you can make a cake in garage and export it to Paris. Almost impossible. The open market is about the rules, it's about the regulation, it's about the following all regulations starting from safety rules. And so we have a great future if we had already chance twice. And I really strongly believe that Ukraine had a chance to join EU in 2004-5, and we lost, unfortunately. We have to learn fast. Thank you.
Just 3 comments. First of all, I love the idea of a report. I'll drop you my card. Please send the report to me once it's finished. I'd love to read it. Secondly, I think you raised right point that Ukraine needs markets. I'm not entirely sure about the adjective free, but in my conversation with entrepreneurs, and my job is to support exports. So I'm talking about EU single market exports to Africa, Latin America, Asia. The stability and clarity of rules is the most necessary part. Knowing, or a very small fraction of entrepreneurs complain about the complexity of single market. Rather, they complain about the lack of clarity and the regulatory maze in murky waters to one of those, in those countries with rather lack of heavy-handed regulations like that. So the stability is the second part. And third part, what you've mentioned is already happening. Theoretically, we've devised the reconstruction and recovery part in 2 parts, the humanitarian assistance, and that's happening right now with modular hospitals, with demining, with psychological help for victims of war. That is already happening on the ground right now. But we have to think about long term, and that will require much more resources than just immediate humanitarian action. But a plan is necessary, otherwise we're going to squander the chance. And finding right means and ways to ensure that the process is manageable, that money flows consistently and not just on one go and completely destroying, the monetary system in Ukraine. And in a transparent, safe, legal way is a necessity for us all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next question. Can you please pass the mic? Okay, thanks. There's only one book. Yes. John will have to choose.
I will try to be short and brief. But I have to make a short assumption before asking the question. So we are talking about Ukraine, we are talking about Ukraine accession to EU, about Poland, about some problems with distribution of goods or eventual competition between countries. But we forget about some, let's say, emotional intelligence. So if we join Ukraine and Ukraine will join us, maybe we better should look at this joint venture as a kind of potential and opportunity.
You have to turn on the mic.
Yeah, so I think it is an opportunity to have Ukraine in our family than not to have. If we look at the Russian soldiers, which are taking the toilets and washing machines to Russia, it means that they do not have these items at home and they cannot buy them, or they not have enough intelligence to earn money and buy them. And we are now talking about Ukraine, take Ukraine or not to take Ukraine, is it a risk for us or not a risk? How about compliance? How about corruption? How about this? How about that? But the world will not end on the Ukrainian border. We are now, I think, looking at Russia as a kind of black hole, as a kind of desert, which currently it is not. And my question is to you, after the war will finish and after Ukraine will win that war, because I am completely convinced that they will, and after we will accept Ukraine to EU, and after we will create a really beautiful market, and after we will, let's say, solve our problems, small problems with bureaucracy in the European Union, what will happen with Russia? How do you think? And especially what will happen with the human resources? Because that is what about this war is. Not about earth, not about land, not about production facilities, but about human resources. And getting Ukraine to Europe and getting Ukraine to Western model, Western world, Western values, we are creating, let's say, a huge potential and human resources abilities that we can use. What about Russia? Are they going to join us later or sooner or later, or are they going to, I don't know, what to do? What are going to be in 10, 20, 30 years of time?
Very difficult questions for Bob.
Okay,
Step aside from this one.
Okay, I can try to answer you, because you've remarked very well, it is also a matter of mentalities. It's not just about politics, not just about institutions or regulations. Yeah, it's about mentality, it's being an European and accepting capitalism and democracy. It's also a cultural thing. It's a thing that you own it in time. It takes time. For instance, my generation, we aren't entrepreneurship orientated. But I don't know, the nowadays students, which are 10 years younger, they are orientated because the time passed and they have other mentality. So maybe it's in this transition, it's also a matter of civic culture, if you want to. Okay. Okay, and one last remark. It's a documentary made in Romania about the transition. It's very interesting. It's about the billionaires which were, they've become billionaires in the 90s after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the Romanian Revolution. So there are a lot of interviews there, and they are pretty honest in offering the answers. So maybe watching this documentary, it's called Capitalism with K, Our Secret Recipe. Our Secret Recipe. You can watch it, and maybe also you can find an answer to your question there.
Please.
I think that the answer to your question It's not so simple, not about Ukraine, and not about Russia, by the way. Because in my dream, the victory of Ukraine will mean a lot for Europe, not only for EU. So we will see the absolutely different map of ex-Soviet Union. And basically, if I follow your question, I have to ask what will happen with Belarus, what will happen with Moldova. And it will be not countries belongs to Russia anymore or depends of Russia. We have to think what will happen in the Asia with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and we can see already a lot of changes. So basically, this is the last question in my mind, what will happen in Russia. So my dream is a big fence with crocodiles, and let them live by their own, like we can see maybe it's not so political correctly, but this is my real dream. And actually we have to take care about ourselves, not about Ukraine, about all Europe. And we have a chance to win. I strongly believe we will win. But the question is more deep, as you see.
There's like
Thank
a
you.
million of questions that could be asked, but I guess we are running out of time. That is the end of the formal part of our conference. The rest belongs to the bar. You're all welcomed to have a pint of beer with us. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the attendance. Martin, would you like to add something as a representative of organizers?
Just a minute, maybe. Yeah, I just want to thank the organizers, of course, of this whole event. I also want to thank all the speakers. I think it was a great discussion. It was a very lively discussion. In my opinion, what we learned is that the EU has many ways to speed up the process of accepting the Ukraine in the EU. And the Ukraine has also many ways on how to improve their economic performance in the future. So that's a good outlook, in my opinion. Yeah, I hope that most of you will also be at the FMRS next year. Maybe that's in Kiev then. Let's hope so. And yeah, thank you to all of you, also the audience at the stream also. And yeah, thank you. Let's go for a drink.
Thank you so much. And one last thing that we have to decide on is to which of those two questions the book goes. Maybe it's not to me. The decision is not mine, it's John's. We had two questions and the one book. You brought only one book with you, sorry. You made it hard for you.
Well,
Not me.
I have two.
So where is the other one? Okay. Thank you so much. And